Welcome to the South Bay Diabetes Rewind Seminar. We hope you enjoy today's presentation. We have many other health presentations on our YouTube channel. Feel free to check them out.
Good evening. Our topic today is carbohydrates. As usual, I would like to start with a reminder that the purpose of this program is education. So please work with your healthcare provider so they can adjust your diabetes medications and help keep your blood sugars in a safe range. Mrs. C was a lady that I saw as a patient about a month ago. Mrs. C is not her real name. She was 64 years old when I met her, and she'd been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at age 30. She was on non-insulin medications for diabetes for the first 14 years of her course. Then about 10 years ago, evidence of autoimmune diabetes was detected, and she was put on insulin, and her diagnosis was changed to type 1.5 diabetes. When I met Mrs. C on May 31, she was taking Humulin U500 insulin, 80 units before each of her 3 meals daily. She was also taking Jardiance, an oral medication for diabetes. She was eating at that time, as I mentioned, the 3 meals, plus 1 or 2 snacks a day. She consumed dairy daily, meat 3 or 4 times a week, and eggs a couple times a week. She was experiencing severe pain in her back, her hip, and her knee, which limited her mobility to the point that she was exercising only when she was not in severe pain. And so that was about 15 minutes a couple times a week. Mrs. C decided to go into a lifestyle intervention program, and she started this on May 31. By about 3 weeks into the program, she had cut her daily insulin use by 58%. Also, her weight was down about 1 pound per day. So by the end of the 3 weeks, it was down 22 pounds. Now that is more weight than I typically recommend that people lose in 3 weeks. Actually, it's a lot more weight than I ever recommend people lose. But she was not starving herself. She was eating all that she wanted at each of her meals, and she was eating 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. She had less pain in her joints, and so she was able to exercise up to over 7,000 steps a day. And her cholesterol had dropped over the 3 weeks by 31%. As far as her total cholesterol was concerned, triglycerides were down from the 400s to the 200s. The HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, did drop some. And that's typical for people who are starting a low-fat diet and who are in weight loss programs. But I anticipate her HDL cholesterol will come up as she continues her new lifestyle. Her LDL cholesterol was measurable during her second blood test because she had lower triglycerides, and LDL cholesterol was at the target for people with diabetes, as it was less than 70. She was not on a low carbohydrate diet. She was eating a bowl full of oatmeal or some other cooked cereal every day for breakfast, as well as about 5 large spoonfuls of fruits, as well as a non-dairy milk and some nuts. She was really enjoying the food and was eating a number more servings of carbohydrates for lunch. She was praising God for his blessings and was motivated to help others experience the health benefits she had found. There are 2 kinds of nutrients. Macronutrients, which give us calories, include fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And then there are micronutrients, such as vitamins and minerals. Carbohydrates are the macronutrient that is made of sugar. And macronutrients, and sugars are basically what we think of when we think of things that taste sweet. Simple sugars are comprised of glucose. Sorry, I'd like to restart this slide. There are 2 kinds of nutrients. There are macronutrients, which give us calories, and these include proteins, fat, and carbohydrate. And then there are micronutrients, such as vitamins and minerals. Carbohydrates are the macronutrient, which are composed of sugar. There are simple sugars, which are single sugars like glucose or fructose, and you can see the chemical depiction here of glucose molecules, and they taste sweet. Then there are starches, which are long chains of sugar molecules all strung together. Here is a picture of amylopectin, and each dot represents a sugar molecule. You can see how they are connected in branching chains. Enzymes in our saliva and in our digestive tract break these sugars apart one at a time, and you can imagine that it takes a long time, hours, to break apart long sugar chains like amylopectin. Then there's fiber, which, like starch, is composed of long chains of sugar molecules. However, fiber, sugar molecules are joined in a different way than they are in starches. And so enzymes in the human body cannot break apart the sugar molecules in fiber. However, that's okay because bacteria in your microbiome can metabolize fiber and can use it for energy to help them colonize your digestive tract. There are two main classes of carbohydrates. Basically, there are refined carbohydrates and whole food carbohydrates. Refined carbohydrates are foods such as sucrose, which is table sugar, as well as high fructose corn syrup, and dextrose. And they are formed through a manufacturing process in which a whole fruit or vegetable, or in this case, sugarcane, is subjected to a long set of processes in a plant. These processes include milling, cracking, grinding, washing, extracting, boiling, steaming, condensing, and drying. The product is a solid powder, crystal, flour, or syrup that is either sold singly by itself or is added to products to make them appeal to customers. The National Health and Nutrition Examinations survey estimated a few years ago that in the US, the average person was consuming 14% of their daily calories from added sugars. And if you guessed that the number one source of added sugars in the US diet were drinks, you would be correct. Other of the top 5 sources listed here include mostly products that a person could buy in a package and purchase at a store. Now, the World Health Organization has recommended that around the world, people limit their added sugar to comprise less than 10% of their daily calories. The goal, however, is to consume less than 5% of our calories from added sugars. And that's equivalent to about 6 teaspoons or 24 grams. Each teaspoon of sugar is equivalent to 4 grams of sugar. So we should be consuming no more than 24 grams of added sugar daily. But ideally, a person would consume no added sugar. The World Health Organization in all their research has not found any adverse health effects linked with avoiding added sugar altogether. So how do you spot added sugar? Well, as you can see, added sugar shows up in many forms. And while it's not practical to memorize all of these names, it may be helpful to look for keywords in ingredients lists. And these would include words ending in OSE or OS, or ingredients that end in words such as juice, syrup, or concentrate. Those are all good signs that the ingredient is an added sugar. Sugar-sweetened beverages have been studied for their health effects. In this study, 29 healthy young men were given sugar-sweetened beverages, and they had 5 options. They consumed either moderate or high amount of fructose daily, moderate or higher amount of glucose daily, or high amounts of sucrose daily. And they followed the pattern of sugar consumption, each of these patterns, 5 patterns, for 3 weeks, after which they had blood tests done. They also tried to follow dietary advice to consume low amounts of fructose for 3 weeks, after which they also had blood tests. After they consumed the beverages with fructose, whether moderate or high amounts, and also after they consumed high amounts of sucrose in their beverages, the small, dense LDL particles increased. You may know that it is the small, dense LDL particles which most increase our risk of atherosclerotic vascular disease. Also, fasting glucose and high sensitivity CRP levels increased with all 5 of the sugar sweetened beverages. And high sensitivity CRP is a marker of inflammation, especially vascular inflammation, and is linked with increased risk of vascular disease. So even in healthy young men who consumed moderate amounts of sugar sweetened beverages, adverse effects occurred. Another type of refined carbohydrate is refined grains. Refined grains are processed to remove the outer bran layer, as well as the protein-rich germ component. All that is left then is the starchy endosperm. And while the endosperm may comprise most of the grain by volume, it is not the most nutrient-dense portion. Refined grains include a lot of the white products that we purchase: white breads, white pastas, white rice, and then even cream of wheat, cereal, and pearled barley are composed of refined grains. So you may hear people say, since refined carbohydrates are devoid of nutrients, maybe we should dispense with carbohydrates altogether. And I'm sure you know, as well as I know, people who have tried low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets. Well, these diets have been studied in individuals who are overweight and have type 2 diabetes. In this study of 28 individuals, the initial carbohydrate goal was less than 20 grams per day. And the main outcome of interest was the A1C. The researchers found that within the 16-week period of the study, A1C did decrease. It went down about 1.1 points. And the 17 of the 28 participants were able to either discontinue or reduce their diabetes medications. Also, average weight in the participants of this study decreased by 6%, and their fasting triglyceride levels dropped 42%. What was interesting is that the other types of lipids, such as total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, did not change significantly. And this was also a short-term study lasting under 4 months. So it is true that low carbohydrates diets do lower blood sugars. If I'm eating, say, 200 grams of carbohydrates daily, and then I decide I'm going to cut my calories from carbohydrates in half, I will have less glucose floating around in my blood. Let's assume that I have type 2 diabetes. Some of my insulin receptors are not working. It won't really matter in this case how well the insulin receptors are working, because if I just cut my intake of carbohydrate, I will still have less glucose or less sugar in my blood. But the fact that my blood sugar is lower does not mean that my insulin receptors are working better. It simply means that I am not challenging them as much. Ketogenic diets have also been used for individuals with epilepsy, and that's because ketogenic diets lead to metabolic acidosis, and this state has a potent anticonvulsive effect. In Korea, 129 children were tried on a ketogenic diet, and they had a long period of time to follow this diet during the course of the study, about a 6-year time span. But the researchers noted complications. Early after starting the diet, within the first 4 weeks, the children often reported dehydration, as well as a number of GI side effects, such as nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. They had evidence of fat malabsorption. Later into the course of their low carbohydrate diet, after about a month on the diet, they had decreased bone mineral density or osteopenia, so they were at increased risk of bone fractures. Some also developed kidney stones. Some had a change in their heart muscle or cardiomyopathy. Some of the children developed iron deficiency anemia. Others were reporting increased hair loss. And adolescent girls in the study, in a greater frequency than would be expected, experienced a decrease in menstruation. And the list of side effects is really too long for me to fit onto this slide, but the complications also included 3% of the children dying. Within the first 6 months of the study, over half of the children had discontinued the ketogenic diet. And by the end of the study, 40% approximately remained on the diet. And all of these children who discontinued the diet did so despite the fact that they were experiencing fewer seizures on the diet. We really don't have long-term studies to show the safety or health benefits of ketogenic diets. In summary, macronutrients provide us with calories, and the macronutrient that provides us with sugar is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are broken down into either simple sugars like single sugars or double sugars, which taste sweet. Then there are starches, which are long strings of sugar molecules strung together. And then we have fiber. There are two basic types of carbohydrates: refined carbohydrates and whole food carbs. And ketogenic diets, lower in carbohydrates, do work for decreasing hemoglobin A1C levels and blood sugars in the short term, but they do have complications and are very difficult to follow long term. The good news is that we are not limited to refined carbohydrates. There's the entire category of whole food carbohydrates. We'll talk about those coming up next.
Hey, good evening. Good to see you all. Want to share with you a principle that my mother taught me when I was young. She said, Chris, things that are worth having are worth working hard for. One day while I was at work, there was it was a really hot day, kind of like we've had recently. And I was building some boat docks, and we had a crane on the bars that we were using, and we would hold onto the bottom of the crane, and somebody would raise us up as high as that crane would go. It'd be like 40 feet in the air. And when we got to the very top, we would let go and we would plummet 30 feet or 40 feet, whatever it was, down into the water. And it was just a lot of fun. Well, we had a new guy that started with us, and his name was Rod. And Rod had never done this before. And so he was really excited to give it a try. And so the area where we were, there was, hang on, I'm trying to adjust something here. The area where we were, there was, the water was fairly shallow. It was about 8 feet deep. So you had to be careful. When you went into the water, you had to make sure that you bent your knees up quickly into a ball so that you didn't go all the way to the bottom of the lake and get hurt. So I did it first. It took me all the way to the top. I let go. I just plummeted all the way through the air, hit the water, and I went into a ball, and I went right to the bottom of the lake. And when I got down there, I felt that the bottom was really silty. It was really soft, which is a good thing. And so I swam to the top and got out. And so Rod, it was his turn. And so he grabbed hold of the bottom of the crane, and they picked him up, and he didn't get out all the way. He got up maybe 20 feet, and he thought that was high enough. So he let go of the crane. And when he went into the water, he forgot to bend his knees, and he kept them straight. And he went to the bottom of the lake. So we were there on top waiting for Rod to come up, and we were waiting and we were waiting and we were waiting, and Rod didn't come up. And we're like, what's going on? And I was about ready to jump into the water to find out what happened to Rod when he came bursting out of the surface, just gasping for air. He could hardly just contain himself to get enough air. And he crawled out just completely out of breath. He was missing one of his boots. We're like, Rod, what happened to you? And he's like, I forgot to bend my legs. And when I went in, his feet went straight into the bottom of the lake bed and the really soft mud down there. And he got stuck in the mud. And he couldn't get out. He was trying to get out, but he couldn't push down because it was soft. Eventually he wiggled out, and he lost his boot down there. But you know, when Rod was down there in the bottom of the lake, there was something he wanted that was worth struggling for. You know what I'm saying? He wanted air. Like, he wanted to get out of there. He wanted to live. And it took every bit of strength he had to get out. There are some things that are worth struggling for. You know what I mean? I mean, we don't all like to struggle, but sometimes the struggle is really important. The Bible tells us this really important principle, and it's true. It says this in James chapter 1. It says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into different trials. knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. The Bible actually teaches that we will go through trials. Sometimes we wonder, where is God and why am I going through trials? But the Bible actually teaches we are going to go through trials, and God allows those trials to come into our experience for a reason, to strengthen us, to give us energy, to help us to know we don't want to go back there again. There's a number of reasons why God allows trials to come into our life. I don't know how many of you have ever raised chickens, but one of my daughters raises chickens, or did raise chickens, and the neighbors' dogs and other animals have gradually reduced our flock down to we have one hen left. But it's really interesting to see when they lay their eggs and a hen sits on the eggs. After a while, after 21 days, the chick will hatch. And if you've ever seen a chick hatch, it's just absolutely amazing. I've seen it. It's amazing. The chick will begin to peck from the inside, and it pecks a little hole through the shell, and then it pecks a circle in the end, and it pokes its head through, and then it uses its legs to kind of break its way out. That process is really important for that chick. Like if you think I'm going to help the chick and I'm going to break the shell off, that's the worst thing you can do. That chick needs the struggle of getting out of that shell to give it the strength that it needs. You might break one of the little arteries that's in the shell. The chick needs to press and use its muscles to get out of there, to strengthen. All of that is really important in that process. Now, some of you are developing new habits. You're learning some things here, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to apply that in my life, and I'm going to do it. And you're going to find you're going to have a lot of success in your life. It's going to be great. But it's going to take a struggle. And sometimes you're going to slip up. Like, you know what? I did not mean to eat a dozen donuts or whatever, you know? I mean, that might not be your plan, but sometimes you might fall. And what you need to do when you fall is just to get back up again. The Bible tells us this in Psalms 46. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. God wants to help you in your struggling, in your difficulty. He is there for you, and he will help you. Proverbs 24 tells us, for the righteous man falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumbles in calamity. The difference between the righteous and the wicked is the righteous actually get back up again after they fall. So you're learning principles of health here that you're going to apply in your life. Things that are worth having are worth struggling for. Rod wanted air more than anything else, and he struggled with all of his being so that he could have that air. And I'm telling you, the battle that you're in right now is really a life and death struggle, because let's face it, diabetes is not something anyone wants to, have the ultimate end of that. I mean, there is a change that you can make in your life through the principles you're learning here. And as you're struggling, you might fall, but hey, get back up again, because God is there to be a refuge and a strength and a very present help in trouble. So just know that I'm praying for you. Our whole team is praying for you. And we just hope that you take these principles and apply them, and you're going to really be amazed at the difference it's making in your life.
Good evening and happy 4th of July weekend. How blessed we are to live in a free country with so many choices and opportunities. Tonight, I have a fun, easy 5-minute dessert for you. It is a raw dessert, so none of the ingredients are cooked. And it all starts with raw carrots. This year, we as a family decided to grow some carrots, and we had never grown carrots before. We planted them from seed early in the spring, and we have not been able to hardly wait to try them. And this week we pulled one up out of the ground, and I could not believe how sweet this little carrot was. It hasn't fully grown, but oh wow, so sweet, sweeter than anything that we've had at the store before. However, despite its sweetness, the carrots have a glycemic index of 16, so it won't spike your blood sugar levels. So it's a wonderful vegetable to use as a treat. In this recipe, we are also going to use almonds and dates, cinnamon, salt, and oats. Now, the first step to this recipe is to shred your carrots. Now you can do this with a box grater or even a hand grater. I just happen to have a food processor and I used it for this entire recipe. So I used the shredding blade to shred my carrots. And the reason you shred your carrots is so that you can get an even texture for your cookie that we're making. So shredding the carrots first. Now, as you can see, here's my food processor. You can still see shreds of carrots in it. Now, I opted to use whole ingredients, as you see. So I have whole almonds and whole dates. And I'm going to process these to make a ground texture, not completely like flour, but like kind of pea size almost. You can, if you do not have a food processor, you could use almond flour in the place of almonds, and you can make a date paste in your blender. Also, the oats is something that you would also have to think about, and you would want to use oat flour. Again, you can make that in your own blender, or you could buy oat flour at the store and make this in a bowl. But as I had a food processor, I'm just going to end up show you here that I browned just the almonds and the dates here together. Now, once I have that done, I'm going to add in the rest of the ingredients, which is the oats, cinnamon, and salt. And you just go ahead and you process these until it just starts to stick together pretty well. Now, after that, you just roll them into balls and you end up with a fabulous dessert. Now, you can eat these right away or you can refrigerate them. And they keep very well in the fridge for about a week. And so you can pull one out and have that as your dessert. I hope you all have a wonderful week and that you have a chance to try this.
Good evening and welcome to another exercise session. We are going to discuss tonight a little bit about what can be done to stretch your muscles after you have exercised so well. I don't know about you all, but having started up a more intense exercise program for cardiovascular to make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching, one of the first things that I noticed was that my muscles were feeling really tight after I did that good workout. So these stretches should be another way that are helpful to you to be able to feel better after you've done the workout and have your body in the ultimate condition to be ready for another workout later. So you notice that I put a picture of rubber bands down in the corner here, and that's because rubber bands are a lot like muscles and how they react. If you stretched a rubber band and you put it around a thick pile of papers and you left it overnight, when you came back and took that rubber band off, you would notice a difference in its shape. However, if you had just put it around that stack of papers and then you came back immediately and you took it off, you probably wouldn't notice so much of a change in it. Muscles are similar in that they need a good amount of time to actually get the effect of the stretch that will be lasting. So researchers have checked into how much time is ideal, and 15 to 30 seconds is an ideal amount of time for your muscles to be able to get a good stretch and still show a noticeable change from that stretch. Smaller muscles don't need as long. So the smaller muscles are the muscles you're going to hold the stretch for 15 seconds. And larger muscles really need a good 30 seconds of stretch time. You're going to do each stretch 3 times on each side. So for any of the larger muscle groups that we are stretching, you would need a good 1.5 minutes worth of stretch on those muscles in order to notice the good demonstrable change. Now, some other principles we need to make sure and cover are that we want to stretch gently. We never, ever want to bounce into stretches. Bouncing into stretches can cause damage to the muscle and injury, and we don't want that. So you're not going to bounce into any of your stretches for the purposes of this exercise. We are also not going to stretch to tears or tears. This is a play on words here. Muscles actually can tear while stretching them. And we don't want to cause a visible tear in the muscle. We want microscopic tears. That's what's actually causing the stretch and the change. But we don't want to actually cause a visible tear in the muscle. So anything that is causing you pain that might bring tears to your eyes, that's too much. Back off. Don't stretch that hard. We need to watch our form carefully while we're stretching. So to do that, I recommend either stretching near a full-length mirror where you can watch your stretch and make sure and compare it to the handout, make sure that it is looking correct, or you can have a family member check your form with the exercises against that handout. Now, something else you can do, a lot of us have cell phones that take videos now. And so you could set a cell phone on a tripod or set it up in a place where you could take a video of yourself stretching and then compare your form. I recommend that you regularly compare your form on the exercises with the form of the handout, just to check and see how that is doing. Make sure that everything is lined up the way that it needs to line up and that you are doing the stretches how they will be best for you. Now this is heel cord stretch A. You're going to choose just one position to do this stretch in, so you don't need to do all three of these, just one of them. You can do this stretch on the step. If you are using a step with a railing, just make sure that the railing is very secure before you lean on it or use it for balance. You're going to make sure that your position on that step is toward the toes, but not uncomfortably so. And then you're just going to let the heels drop down off the step behind there till you feel a good stretch on this muscle. Another way you can do this exercise is to lean against a wall. I don't recommend using a door, since if someone were on the other side and might not know what you were doing, they might come through and cause an injury. That would not be good. So if you lean against a wall, one foot, the foot that's getting the stretch, goes back behind you. The toes are still pointed straight toward the wall, as is the heel. And then you lean forward until you feel a good stretch in this muscle on the back leg. The further back your foot is, the more of a stretch you're going to get. The closer it is to the wall, the less of a stretch that you'll get. Another way to do this stretch is using a beach towel, a sheet, or a belt around your foot. You would use it way high up at the toes there again, wherever you can comfortably, where it won't slide off. And you would pull those toes towards you. And those toes pulling towards you is going to give that same good stretch down the back of the leg muscles. This is a different stretch. This is heel cord stretch B. Again, you need to choose one of these pictures. Again, you're going to keep your head, shoulders, heels, toes, everything lined up nice and straight. Again, if you were using a step, although it's harder to do for this one, you would make sure that any railings, anything you're leaning against is secure, is not a doorway that may move. And again, for the second option here, you can use a beach towel, a sheet, or a belt to help reach your toes. Anything that is not elastic, so it won't provide give as you are pulling against it. Now I wanted to compare the two stretches. This was heel cord stretch A here on the left, and this is B here on the right. The difference is stretch A is for the gastroc or gastrocnemius muscle. That muscle is shown here in red. And the difference with that muscle is that, let me move my things around a little bit here so that you can see, is that that muscle actually attaches above the knee. And so in order to get a good stretch on the muscle and to hold it tight, you need to have that knee straight. And it comes all the way down here to the heel. You may feel that one section of this muscle is tighter than another as you do these stretch. Some people feel this stretch way up at the knee. Others feel it more in the mid-belly section of the muscle. And others feel it more at the heel cord. But as long as you're feeling it somewhere within the muscle, that is perfectly within normal limits, as long as it's not bringing you to tears as you are stretching. You want a strong but comfortable stretch. Now, the soleus muscle is shown here in green, and that is what exercise B, set B, was for. And so this standing exercise is similar, but your knee is bent so that we are not trying to stretch this gastroc muscle at all. While we were in that position, the soleus was not getting in a position to get a good stretch. However, because it starts below the knee here and goes down to below, down by on the heel, as you bend that knee, keeping a similar position, you will feel a good strong stretch of the soleus muscle. So that shows a little bit about what's the same and what's different here. Again, comparing the sitting exercises, stretch on the left is stretch A with the knee straight. Again, that one's going to stretch the gastrocnemius muscle, and stretch B is for the soleus with the knee bent. Again, toes still need to be pointed straight forward. Heels need to be in line. Heels need to be in line with the toes. Everything needs to be lined up, sitting with really good posture and really straight. Okay. Now, the hamstring stretches, you can see here in green, the hamstring muscle. These can be done on the bed. This hamstring stretch, first one shows you in a chair, and then having a step stool or another chair in front of you to put your heel on, that's fine as well. Or you can do it just with this other leg that you're not stretching hung off the side of the bed. And then when you go to do the other side, you'll just have to switch directions on the bed. The hamstring muscle is made up of a couple muscle bellies here, and so you'll want to be sure and keep everything lined up nice and good and straight, and lean forward to the point where you feel a strong but still comfortable stretch. Alternately, you can do this laying on the bed using that same towel or sheet or strap around your foot, and then bringing your foot up straight. Now the quadriceps are on the opposite side of the leg. They're on the front of the thigh there. And the quadriceps are shown in red here in my picture in the corner. We oftentimes abbreviate them to the quad muscles. They're actually a set of 4 different muscles. But a good way to stretch all of those muscles is laying on your side on the bed, bringing your foot back behind you, keeping your knee in line with that bottom leg, which is in line with the rest of your body. So everything should be a nice straight line here. And that will give a good stretch of the quadriceps muscle. It should also help you do this stretch safely. One can do it in standing, but good balance is required. And as I have found recently, it's actually difficult to do it in standing. So I would highly recommend, for safety's sake, that you do it laid down on a bed. So your assignment this week is you're going to choose one each. You're going to choose one of the gastroc stretches or the heel cord stretch A's. Okay, you're going to choose one soleus stretch or the heel cord stretch B. You're going to choose one version of the hamstring stretch, and you're going to also perform the quadricep stretch, which was that last one we saw lying on your side. You're going to do all of these stretches for each of these muscles after the burst training session. You're going to hold them about 30 seconds each. You're going to do about 3 times on each side. And again, this week, it would be wise for you to use last week's principles to increase your burst training by 1 additional variable this week. So depending on whether you're adding a burst session, you're increasing your burst length, maybe you're changing your terrain, maybe you're changing your speed, whatever that is, go ahead and change a variable again this week. Assuming that you are not dealing with sickness or any other problem, respect that sickness if you are. And this slide just shows the references that I used for these pictures for tonight's presentation. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Now let's talk about carbohydrates from whole plant foods. In December of 2020, the United States Food and Drug Administration released their Dietary Guidelines for Americans for 2020 through 2025. And on that document, they had this diagram, this figure. And in it, they list the percent of the population depicted by these bars that are either getting adequate amounts or are under consuming different foods. In blue, we can see represented the portion of the population that is under consuming a food item. So in general, Americans are under consuming vegetables, they're under consuming the dark green vegetables. Most Americans are under consuming the red and orange vegetables. We're mostly under consuming legumes like beans, peas, and lentils, and starchy vegetables such as root vegetables and cooked winter squash we are under consuming. And then for fruits, again, only about a small fraction, like 20% of the US population was getting enough fruits, and whole grains are largely underconsumed, with under 5% of persons in the US eating enough of them. So apparently there's a benefit to all of these carbohydrate-rich foods. Let's look at some of those benefits. One benefit of whole food carbohydrates is their fiber content. Benefits of fiber are plentiful, and they include improved digestive tract motility. The soluble fiber, which we get in beans, peas, lentils, and some whole grains, helps to lower our cholesterol. Also, fiber in carbohydrates helps to stabilize the carbohydrate so that it's broken down more slowly. The sugar molecules are released more gradually, which means that our blood sugar levels do not rise as quickly after we eat carbohydrates which contain fiber. Fiber also improves our sense of satisfaction after meals and decreases our risk of developing type 2 diabetes and colon cancer. The recommended daily allowance of fiber is 14 grams for every 1,000 calories that we are consuming daily. So for women, that amounts to at least 25 grams of fiber a day, and for men, at least 38 grams per day. More health benefits are seen with higher intakes. And in this class, we're recommending up to at least 45 grams of fiber per day for women and at least 50 grams of fiber per day for men. And when I say up to this amount, I just mean that we want to gradually increase our amount of fiber on a weekly basis until we are at goal. On average, US adults are consuming only half the recommended amount of fiber, but thankfully, whole food carbohydrates are rich in fiber. These foods are eaten as they are grown, really the way God packaged them. Keep in mind that just because a bread is labeled multigrain or 12 grain doesn't mean it is whole grain. The grains could still be refined and the bread may be low in fiber. As a rule of thumb, look for 1 gram of fiber for every 10 grams of carbohydrate on a bread label or pasta label. And an even better rule of thumb is 1 gram of 1 gram of fiber for every 5 grams of carbohydrate. For example, if I am eating a slice of whole grain bread, if it's truly whole grain and it has 15 grams of carbohydrate, it should contain 3 grams of fiber to give me that ratio of 1 gram of fiber for every 5 grams of carbohydrate. And when you look at the ingredient list on breads or pastas, make sure the first ingredient is the word whole. A study conducted by Harvard University involved over 150,000 US adults who were followed for long periods of time. We've already talked about results from the Nurses Health Study, Nurses Health Study 2, and Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. And in this particular report, the researchers were looking at the risk of type 2 diabetes and associated with fruit consumption. And during the long course of follow-up in this study, over 12,000 cases of type 2 diabetes were diagnosed. And the researchers were able to see the effect of substituting 3 servings per week of fruit juice with the same amount of whole fruit. You can see here the risk of type 2 diabetes did go down in general as persons consumed more whole fruit versus fruit juice. The benefit maybe wasn't as great with cantaloupes or strawberries, but oranges eaten whole really reduced the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And blueberries had the greatest effect for diabetes risk reduction. And you can see for all these fruits kind of added together, if a person ate them whole, 3 servings per week versus fruit juice, they had a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. Another report looking at people in these same 3 studies was following them for years, and during that follow-up, over 10,000 cases of type 2 diabetes were diagnosed among the participants. And this study was looking at the impact of consuming white rice versus brown rice or another whole grain on diabetes risk. So when 1/3 serving per day of cooked white rice was replaced with brown rice, the risk of developing type 2 diabetes went down 16%. And replacing that same 1/3 cup serving of white rice with a whole grain, just as a general category, reduced the risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 36%. And thinking of other whole grains, you could include quinoa or barley, millet, oats. So even small dietary changes can lead to significant improvements in metabolic health over time. A meta-analysis looked at the results of 29 studies all grouped together, and they found that when persons consumed whole grains, there was a reduction in after-meal glucose and insulin levels. And in some of those studies, consuming whole grains was linked with feelings of increased fullness and less feelings of hunger and less of a desire to eat after consuming the whole grains. So why is it that whole grains help a person to feel satisfied after a meal? Well, part of the answer could be the water content. This is a diagram or a table just showing the water content of whole plant foods. You can see that vegetables and fruits are very high in water. And then if you look down at starches, even a baked potato you see is over 70% water. Going down to the grains, we see cooked brown rice and corn are comprised of over 73% water. On the other hand, refined grains and processed foods are significantly lower in water content. A typical bagel is 34% water, and cornflakes contain only 4% water. So that's a big reduction compared to boiled corn with 73% water. The water in the grains, as well as the fiber, helps to push against the walls of our stomachs and helps us to feel full after a meal. A study of Australian women who were over 75 years of age looked at the impact of flavonoids on risk of death. These women were followed for 5 years and over 1,000 women were in the study. They were grouped into 3 categories based on their consumption of flavonoids: low, mediate, moderate, or high. And in this study, flavonoids came from sources including oranges, apples, pears, and even onions. And here you can see the 5-year risk of death from all causes, and it's categorized by flavonoid intake. Those with the highest flavonoid intake had a 60% reduction in risk of death from all causes compared to those with the lowest flavonoid intake. Also, the study showed a benefit of flavonoids in helping to decrease deaths from cardiovascular disease and cancer. And these are the 2 leading causes of death around the world. So flavonoids are one component of whole carbohydrates, which can help lengthen our lives. Whole plant foods also contain antioxidants. Here you can see the mean antioxidant content of whole plant foods just in general. And according to this scale, they contain about 12 units, or between 11 and 12 units per 100 grams of food. Conversely, animal-based foods as a whole are estimated to contain less than 1 unit of antioxidants per 100 grams. And antioxidants are important because they eliminate free radicals from our bodies. Free radicals increase our inflammation and increase our risk of most chronic diseases. So antioxidants can be found in carbohydrate-rich foods. They're also found in nuts and seeds, but I really highlighted the foods with higher carbohydrate content, including berries, other fruits, vegetables, legumes like beans, peas, and lentils, and then whole grains. Now, whole grains are lower in antioxidants compared to berries, but if you compare them to animal foods, whole grains are still a good source of antioxidants. So what happens to the carbohydrate that we consume? Well, some of it circulates in our blood. 4 grams of glucose circulates in the blood of a 70-kilogram person. And this is the amount of carbohydrate or glucose that would fill just 1 teaspoon. So it's a very small amount compared with the total mass of the human body. However, those 4 grams of carbohydrates exert an effect on many organs. And our organs can exert direct effects on the circulating carbohydrate. These direct effects are represented by the black lines here, and then the blue lines represent indirect effects, such as things like hormones that the organs can secrete to change circulating glucose levels. Also, neuronal signals from different organs can affect our circulating glucose. And when you and I are fasting and sedentary, the brain consumes approximately 60% of our circulating glucose. Now, the liver can store carbohydrate in the form of glycogen. It stores around 100 grams, and muscles store approximately 400 grams of glycogen. So carbohydrates in our diet are important not only to fill these stores, but also to fuel our brain, as it depends solely on glucose for energy. People who eat diets containing more carbohydrates increase the size of their liver and muscle glycogen stores over time, whereas people who eat diets low in carbohydrates have limited glycogen stores in their liver and muscle. A study looking at just 9 individuals back in the 1960s put these individuals on 3 different diets for 1 meal. So they ate a high fat, high protein meal, or a high carbohydrate meal, or they ate a mixed meal, which contained some protein and fat and some carbohydrate. And then they biopsied the muscles of these persons after they consumed each type of meal. And if you guessed that glycogen was higher in the muscles of those who had just eaten the carbohydrate-rich meal, you would be correct. So after eating the meal, the persons in this study biked at 75% maximal oxygen consumption. And so this was just a steady state of biking, and they biked at this pace, this rate, until they were exhausted. Researchers timed how long people could bike after each type of meal, and they found that when people had consumed the high fat, high protein meal, they were able to bike for about 1 hour. When they consumed the meal that had more carbohydrate, but still large quantities of fat and protein, they biked about 2 hours, and yet they were able to bike over 3 hours when they consumed the carbohydrate-rich meal. So it's no wonder that marathon runners carb load before a race. They need the carbohydrate stores to have endurance. I talked about different whole food carbohydrates and how they reduce our risk of type 2 diabetes. But what if I already have type 2 diabetes? Well, a study done by Dr. Neil Bernard and colleagues looked at 99 individuals who had type 2 diabetes. He put approximately half of these persons on a low-fat vegan diet, and the other individuals in his study were put on the American Diabetes Association diet. Now, currently, there is no ADA diet, but back then, they were following the 2003 Dietary Guidelines from the American Diabetes Association. Those on the low-fat, plant-based diet, the vegan diet, were consuming foods including vegetables, fruits, grains, and legumes, and they were getting about 75% of their calories from carbohydrate. Those on the conventional diet were eating foods that they would normally eat, so they didn't really change the type of food they were eating, but most of the persons on this conventional diet ended up being told to reduce their calorie intake by at least 500 per day. So they were portion controlling, calorie counting. The study lasted 74 weeks, and weight loss was significant for both study groups, but it was not significant between the study groups. Those on the vegan diet lost 4.4 kilograms, so right around 9 pounds, and those on the conventional diet lost 3 kilograms. Weight loss is significantly correlated with A1C reduction. So those who lost more weight had a bigger drop in their A1C. Then the researchers looked at A1C changes from the beginning of the study up to 74 weeks. And they found those on the vegan diet had a 0.4 reduction in their A1C by 74 weeks, and those on the ADA diet had a 0.01 reduction. And this change in A1C values occurred before medications were altered. And this change and difference in A1C drop for vegan versus conventional diet was significant. So those on the high carbohydrate vegan diet had a greater drop in their A1Cs. Now, we don't have randomized controlled trials of people on high carbohydrate diets for decades, but we do know of people groups who have followed high carbohydrate diets for many years. There are 5 blue zones in the world. These are the places where people live longest and healthiest. And one blue zone is Okinawa, Japan. Okinawan centenarians, those who've lived at least 100 years, have traditionally been lean with an average body mass index in the low half of the normal range. And traditional Okinawan diets contain about 90 or more % of calories from carbohydrates. Another source I looked at said Okinawan diets were comprised of around 80% of calories from carbohydrates, but in either case, the Okinawan diet is high in carbohydrates. I think the key to the longevity, though, in Okinawans is the source of these carbohydrates, which were predominantly vegetables. And the other 4 blue zones around the world include people who are also eating predominantly plant-based diets, which are high in whole food carbohydrates. So based on these populations, high carbohydrate diets are safe to follow long-term. In summary, we have a plethora of reasons to eat whole carbohydrates. First of all, there's fiber, which decreases our risk of type 2 diabetes and feeds the bacteria in our intestines so that we have a healthy microbiome. Then macronutrients include antioxidants and flavonoids. Carbohydrates also are really important for helping to fuel our muscles and our brains. So don't feel guilty about eating whole food carbohydrates this week. Fill up on them and enjoy. I look forward to seeing you back next week when we discuss intermittent fasting and exercise.